Welcome back to Green is Good, and I'm so honored to have with us today Dr. Sabina Shaikh. She's a lecturer on economics and director of environment, agriculture, and food at University of Chicago. Welcome, Dr. Sabina Shaikh.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We're so glad you're here today, and you don't mind if I call you Sabina during the show?
No, please do.
Even though you are Dr. Shaikh, and I want to honor you with that because that takes a lot to earn those credentials in this world. You know, before we get talking about environmental education today, Sabina, I'd love you to share your journey and your story leading up to this and how you became interested in sustainability and the environment and eventually into teaching these important topics to our next generation behind us.
Sure. Well, I think I may have come to it from a different path than most people. I was in college very interested in economics, actually. I took my first economics class and found it fascinating, particularly the idea of human behavior and how people respond to changes in their surroundings, particularly their environment. So I studied economics. I had a very strong personal interest in environment, and particularly where I went to school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where there's a very strong legacy for environment and sustainability. So I found it really unique to be able to combine my academic interest in economics with my personal interest in environment by focusing on the human component and the human behavior component of environmental stewardship. And that's how it came to be. And so I continued my study in economics throughout graduate school with a specific focus on environmental protection and natural resource management, and that's still what I do today. So.
And for our listeners out there, I'm going to be on Sabina's website at University of Chicago, and for any of the others that want to learn about all the great work she's doing and the interrelationship of environment and economics and environmental education, you could go to www.eaf.uchicago.edu. U as in the letter U, Chicago.edu. EAF.uchicago.edu. Can you explain, Sabina, the relationship that you've learned and you've come to internalize and then externalize between environment and economics, and what's your take on that interrelationship?
Sure, yeah, and that's a very, very good question. I think traditionally people have thought about economics and environment as sort of competing interests, and so I approach it from a different perspective and really look at the use of economics for environmental protection and for environmental stewardship. And I think economics is inherent in every decision we make on a daily basis, and environment is obviously inherent in our ability to live and breathe, and that. So I think there's a real natural connection in incorporating those preferences and those ideas about environment into our everyday decision making. And so that's how I approach it. It's more of a I guess what you'd call a microeconomics approach, thinking about how we make decisions and what affects those decisions, rather than the big picture approach when we think about economic growth and GDP and all those economic concepts that tend to be larger in scope and tend to be in discussion without environment. So I approach it much more from the individual decision making and try to scale up from there.
And can you give, and then take that and then break, that's on a macro approach, that's wonderful, but then take it down to the role of economics and environmental policy in management decision making, and can you give some real world experience in terms of how that interactive role comes to being and what that can mean for decision makers out there?
Sure. If we go all the way down to the individual level, we can think about something as like energy efficiency and what would lead people to engage in energy conservation in their home, for example, or in their decision to drive somewhere. And we think economics can offer policy incentives for people to sort of further their environmental conservation or their energy conservation behavior through things like changing appliances or getting new thermostats or putting in new light bulbs. And how can economics do this? Well, one is just information, just allowing people to understand how they can save money by doing so. And certainly we need the policy in place to allow people to do that. So if it costs me more to put in new light bulbs up front and I can't wait 3 years or 5 years for the return, developing policy instruments that allow us to save the money up front so we can make those investments. And that can come in the form of a rebate, of a tax credit, or of, we've certainly seen sort of one-off policies related to stimulus where people were able to get energy efficient appliances at lower costs just so they could switch out. And same with cars, allowing people to understand how much they're going to save on buying a fuel efficient car, for example. And so there's a lot of different ways that information can be used. The other way that economics works, I think people are probably more familiar with, is by changing prices. So making it more expensive to use things that create pollution, or more expensive to use dirty forms of energy, or to not protect the environment. So making garbage more expensive and making recycling cheaper. So those types of tools, I think, is where economics can play an important role in affecting behavior. And that can go beyond people's beliefs about environment as well. So just, not to simplify it to just a basic, cost saving, but just to try to affect change. Sometimes it's hard for people to just change the way they do something. And so just getting over that hump and making it part of everyday decision making, I think, is where economics can be very powerful.
And for our listeners who just joined in, we've got Dr. Sabina Shaikh with us. She's an educator at the University of Chicago in environment and economics. And can you and her website, at University of Chicago is eaf.uchicago.edu. I'm on the website now. It's so fascinating. How interesting you made sustainability there in terms of environment, agriculture, food, but also on the website is sports and all different other types of subtopics that you're going into. Can you share a little bit with our listeners what's the level of student interest in the environment at the University of Chicago?
Oh, it's tremendous, and I think we actually have a pretty small environmental studies program called the Program on Global Environment, and then we have another small environmental science program at the University of Chicago. But I think the student interest really transcends, the decision to major in environmental studies. I think we see it in every other discipline that's out there, in economics and history and political science and in the physical sciences and all the way throughout the social sciences. We see interest in environmental topics, approached from different disciplines or approached from an interdisciplinary angle. And so what I try to do within my courses and within the Environment, Agriculture, and Food Working Group is really focus on a lot of different topics. We generally approach things in my group from an economics and policy perspective rather than a science perspective, just given my background is not in the physical sciences or biological sciences, but we approach it from that angle, and we try to apply this to many topics as we can, and we do that by establishing projects with partners throughout the city of Chicago and beyond. And like you said, everything from we've worked on urban stormwater management to transportation to we're now currently working on a sports project. And we've tried to apply this to as many different areas as we can. And for the students, I think it gives them a way to take their academic knowledge from what they're learning in their classes, their personal interests in environment, and then apply it to something that's that they interact with on a daily basis in the city. So a couple of years ago, we did a project with the Green Chicago Restaurant Coalition to help develop sustainability standards for restaurants in Chicago. So for a lot of students, they had interest in economics and in environment, but they'd go out to eat and maybe weren't putting those together while they were eating dinner at a restaurant. And so it was a way to understand, where did this food come from? How is it produced? What happens after my plate is taken away? How is this restaurant operating? How are they using water? How are they using energy? And so I really try to make it interesting and try to make it part of what people do on a regular basis, so that it becomes sort of almost second nature to think about these things with respect to environment and also economics.
Sabina, this seems like the new education environmental paradigm, in that a couple shows back we had Dr. Neil Drobny on from Ohio State University, where he teaches sustainability there. And he's doing the same thing. He's taking his sustainability students and he's putting them in public, partnerships with private or publicly traded companies and giving them real world and real life experience. Are you finding that this is the most engaging way now for your students to get the most out of their education at University of Chicago, and to then, when they matriculate, to have not only real-world experience, but also a resume that shows well compared to just one who has had just academic experience?
Well, I think definitely in an applied field like environment, it certainly goes beyond theory. And I certainly don't want to discount what students learn in the classroom. I think that's very important. And I think that's something that has to come first when you're in college. But I think getting out and understanding how things work in the world, particularly something like environment or food, the way my working group came to be actually was through several students came to me and said, most of the environmental groups we can join on campus are more activism-based, and we're not really looking to do activism, we're looking to do research, and we're looking to do research that maybe potentially we can later use for advocacy, or we can use for practical applications, or we can use in the business world. And so I think that that's really important for students to understand that environment is not just about activism, that it applies in many different fields and many different areas. And so taking what they've learned in the classroom and learning how to apply that before they finish college, I think is very important. I think when they go out and start working, then it's gives them a little bit more perspective, but it also gives them experience in interacting with people who are not in an academic setting and trying to take what they're learning in the classroom and see how other people who aren't in the classroom with them are using it and applying it. So I think for something as multidisciplinary as environmental studies or anything related to agriculture or food, I think it's really important to try to connect or complement what they're doing in the classroom with, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, the real world. So.
Right. And then how are all the topics chosen? I mean, obviously, your take on environmental education and the merger of environment and economics can allow you to go down into any subsectors of business or any really areas of society, because the environment and economics can touch them all. Share a little bit about how you choose the topics, how much the students are involved with the choice, how much of it's your leadership, and where you're going next. Not only where the puck is today, but where is it going in the future when it comes to environmental education and the topics that you want your students to tackle and interact with.
Sure, and I think a lot of it is driven by partnerships I have throughout the city of Chicago. So from just working on committees or boards of nonprofits or of for-profit companies and interacting with the environmental community within the city of Chicago and sometimes beyond, I come across ideas that specific groups may have an interest in, but they don't have the resources to go into depth on them. And I have a team of students that is willing to help and interested. And so a lot of it comes about from just talking to people within the environmental community, understanding what the important issues are, looking for partners who are enthusiastic about bringing on a team of students to work with them, which is most people in general. And so, so these partnerships have formed over time, and some of them become ongoing partnerships. So I've worked with groups on water management, and then that will extend to other groups within the city and become more of a collaborative effort. Like I said, I've been working with the Green Chicago Restaurant Coalition on restaurants and food, and the sports project really came out of a collaboration with them in the city of Chicago in understanding how a professional sports community plays a role in overall sustainability planning within a city. So I think a lot of it just comes from interacting with the environmental community. It's generally driven by my interests as well. And so I do have a lot of interest in environments within urban settings and how urban planning affects environment and that. So I think that's a lot of it. I think that's also useful for the students, since we do have a lot of students that come to the University of Chicago for school and then they get jobs and they leave, and they don't spend a lot of time learning about the city of Chicago. And so I think that's a really important piece of this is making sure that students get out, they understand what's going on in Chicago, understanding that environment, a lot of what we hear about environment here is global in scope, and then understanding that it's right in their backyard as well. So while some of my research is international and in other parts of the world, I really try to bring the students into local projects, and to do that, working within the local environmental community so they can understand how things work in the city where they're living. So
yeah, and you're an athlete yourself. You're a triathlete, so you like sports, and that also has a lot to do with it too. But people's personal preferences and stuff like that. And with regards to sports, though, it's so interesting. A good friend of the show's and mine personally is Dr. Alan Hershkovitz, and he's the one who started the Green Sports Alliance. And his, and his take on things is, and he's right. I mean, is that when you do the surveys on society at large, 13% of people enjoy the study of science. 60-something, 67 or 68% of the public enjoy sports. So you go where the people are. So I guess what you're doing is the same thing. You're going to the topics that are near and dear to everyone's heart, and you get to then teach them, environment and economics within those settings. I mean, green restaurant. Who doesn't love to eat? And restaurants are all part of our lives. So I mean, and then now sports and sustainability in Chicago. I mean, what a great sports town. I mean, what a great sports history. So what a great topic. So it's just so interesting, the topics you've chosen and how you've engaged your students.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly Dr. Hershkovitz and the Green Sports Alliance are the leaders in this work, and that's how we came to it, is through their work. The Green Sports Alliance is holding their annual summit in Chicago this summer, and we saw that, our partners in the project saw that and realized that there wasn't a single Chicago team or venue in the Green Sports Alliance, and it looked like a great opportunity to get them engaged and to also at the same time try to incorporate them into the city's Sustainable Chicago 2015 plan as being an integral part of that. And so that's how it came to be. And so we're definitely relying on the work that's been done by Dr. Hershkovitz, by NRDC, by the Green Sports Alliance to take some lessons from that into finding the best practices here in Chicago. Yesterday, my students went on a tour of Soldier Field here in Chicago, where the Bears play, which was the first LEED-certified NFL stadium back in 2011. And so that was fascinating, because how many times do you think about going to a sporting event and you're not really thinking about the sustainability element? So we got the behind-the-scenes tour, and then the recycling, on the food waste management, on the lighting, on the energy use, and it was really fascinating for us all to see that. So I'm learning as much as anyone.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
that's real. I would want to go on that tour. I want to become part of your class. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, you're more than welcome. We need all the expertise we can get. So.
Ray, listen, we're down to the last 2 minutes or so. Share where you're going to be taking your educational, vision in the next years ahead. What's the next steps for environmental education with regards to what you're doing at the University of Chicago in the next few years ahead? What's your next? What's your vision?
Well, I think we certainly want to continue this model that we've developed, which is what we call a practicum-style course, where students take a course over 2 quarters, and it's this application, this real-world application, and we want to keep using that for different topics. So we want to extend that and extend it beyond public policy and environmental studies to other majors, other disciplines as well, so we can start to incorporate other components of sustainability, social impacts, physical impacts, and community impacts, and all the different pieces that sort of go beyond what I do in economics into sort of more holistic environmental education. And so I think that would be something that we can do more collaboratively across the university and across the city as well.
Wonderful. And Sabina, thanks for being a guest. You're always welcome back on Green is Good. If you want to learn more about everything Sabina's doing at the Environment of Agriculture and Food at the University of Chicago, go to eaf.uchicago.edu. Dr. Shuck, thank you for being an environmental education visionary and evangelist. You are truly living proof that green is good.
Thank you so much.